Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Hello, Spotify listener! Was it a good idea to employ me, Claptrap, a lovable robot with an admittedly shrill voice, to tell you about the next great looter shooter, Borderlands 4? Of course not! But you are listening, and that's the sick truth of marketing. Behold! Marketing hypnosis! Borderlands 4! Borderlands 4! Borderlands 4! Buy it! Buy it! Succumb to the marketing!
Rated M for mature.
entering a realm between the hidden and forgotten, a slipstream caught between realities, a secret museum of the esoteric, the private library of shadows, all taking place in a world forged from mystery and caught between logic and myth. You are entering Para-reality.
Good evening, seekers of the strange and the unexplained. Welcome to Para-reality, a place where the shadows whisper, mysteries linger, and the line between fact and fiction grows razor thin. I'm Sandman, your guide through the hidden corridors of reality. Here, every question awakens a mystery, and every mystery pulls us deeper into the truth concealed in the shadows. Tonight, we step once again into the world where truth and mystery collide. You know, I love the Smoky Mountains. I go there as often as I can, but not as often as I'd like. In fact, I just came back from there this past weekend. My wife and I went there for kind of like a short end of summer vacation with some of her family from the Lumbee Native American tribe. Man, I always have fun hanging out with the Lums, as they call themselves for short. And not too long ago, I was at the Tennessee Wildman Encrypted Con in McMinnville, Tennessee. And while I was there, I attended this lecture by a guy named Chester Moore, and it was about feral people. Now, I know that right about now you're thinking, what the heck does Chester Moore and feral people have to do with the Smoky Mountains? But just bear with me here for a minute. While I was at the Smokies this past weekend, we all took a trip to Cage Cove, which is basically the remains of a town that was purchased by the National Park Service in the 1930s so it could become part of the Smoky Mountains National Park. In other words, the U.S. government declared eminent domain and they forced the residents out. It's basically, they bought them out and forced them out is basically what happened. So anyways, we were making our way through Cage Cove, looking at some of the old abandoned buildings and churches and homesteads and stuff that are still standing. I got to thinking about that lecture by Chester Moore, and I started wondering, what if some of the residents of Cage Cove stuck around? What if they decided to just go off into the mountains and live off grid? I mean, after all, the Smokies are a big place and there's plenty of room for at least a small group of people to hide and make a home. And as you can imagine, I quickly began to do some research about the possibility of feral humans living in the Smokies, and well, I was quite surprised on what I learned, and I think that you'll be too. So imagine this. A 6-year-old disappears on Father's Day in 1969. Months later, a witness says he heard a scream and saw a disheveled man in the woods. Decades later, a chorus of videos, forum posts, and tabloid headlines ask the same question. Are feral humans wild men living in the Smokies? That's the question that we'll try to answer tonight. So turn off the lights, fire up a candle or two, and come with me to the Great Smoky Mountains as we hunt for some feral humans. Tonight, we go into the hollows, the archives, and the rabbit holes. This is Parareality. And as always, to learn more, you'll have to turn on, tune in, and find out. But first, I'd like to take a minute to welcome some new followers of the podcast. So I've got another trio of followers to welcome to the Parareality family. First of all, I'd like to welcome Supernatural Scotland, then give a shout out to Kara Clark, and finally, Central Texas Paranormal Investigation Team. Thank you all three for the follow and for listening to the Parareality podcast. You know, I've got close to 3,000 followers. I keep getting closer and closer to that 3,000 mark. So if you just happen to be listening to this podcast and you don't follow it regularly, I'm going to ask right now that you please hit that follow button on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. I think that you'll find that this podcast differs from others like it by offering a different point of view from the norm. I simply present the evidence to you and let you, the listener, make up your own mind, and I encourage you to do your own research. And if you do follow me on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate it. But I also need you to follow me on the socials too. So if you don't follow me on the social media platforms, well, shame on you, because you need to do that too. This way you can keep up with all the latest goings on with the Parareality podcast, as well as take a tiny, teensy, bitty glimpse into my personal life, doing some of my travels and stuff behind the scenes. And I'll be giving you the deets on how you can do all of that later on in the podcast. So once again, welcome to the new followers, Supernatural Scotland, Kara Clark, and Central Texas Paranormal Investigation Team. Thank you all three for the follow.
Hi everybody, I'm Sandman, host of the Parareality podcast. I want to invite you to join me on September 20th at this year's Anomicon virtual conference, where I'll be a featured speaker. My presentation is called The Ethics of Conspiracy Theories and Accountability, When Belief Crosses into Harm. We'll be examining how unfounded narratives can spiral into real-world consequences, from harassment and violence to the erosion of democratic institutions. Conspiracy theories don't just live online. They shape lives, they influence behavior, and sometimes they destroy. This talk isn't just about identifying the problem. It's about asking the hard questions. What responsibility do we have when we share these stories, and where do we draw the line between belief and harm? Anomicon is an annual, free virtual conference that brings together speakers from around the world to present their research and insights on all things anomalous, from UFOs and the paranormal to the cryptozoological and supernatural. Anomicon attempts to get to the heart of these mysteries, one discussion at a time. It'll be streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, X, and Facebook, so mark your calendars for September the 20th. Join me for this important conversation at Anomicon 2025. Find out more at anomicon.com, and I'll see you there.
Parareality is a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com.
Broadcast from a secret bunker somewhere outside of Nashville, Tennessee. This is the award-winning podcast, Parareality.
Welcome back, Seekers of the Strange. I'm Sandman, your host. You know, the Smoky Mountains are full of beauty and stories, and tonight we chase one of the darker threads, feral humans. We'll examine the origin stories, the evidence, the counter-evidence, and what's left when the legends go quiet. So when we talk about the legends of feral humans in the Smoky Mountains, there's one story that always seems to surface. One case that seems to cast a shadow over every other missing persons report that came before or after. That case is the disappearance of 6-year-old Dennis Martin all the way back in the summer of 1969. Now, for anyone who's spent time around missing persons in national parks, the name Dennis Martin may ring a bell to you. It's become more than just a tragic disappearance. For many believers, it's become Exhibit A in the theory that feral humans, or wild men living off the grid, are still stalking visitors in the Smokies. But let's rewind the clock and see how this whole thing started. So it was Father's Day weekend, June 14th, 1969. The Martin family from Knoxville, Tennessee, made the trip to Cades Cove and into the high country of the Smoky Mountains National Park. Now, this was meant to be a celebration. Dennis's father, William, wanted to spend the weekend hiking and camping with his sons, and made their way up towards Spence Field, which is a grassy area near the Appalachian Trail, not far from the Tennessee-North Carolina border. That afternoon, Dennis, who was just 6 years old at the time, was playing with his older brother and some other kids, and the kids came up with a game. What they do, they would split up, circle around, and then jump out from the bushes to scare the adults. It's a, classic little kid mischief game. And Dennis, who was the youngest, was told to go hide behind a bush and wait for the signal. And all the other kids looped around the trail and got ready to, make their move. And when the kids jumped out at the adults, laughing, shouting, all that sorts of stuff, the adults pretended to be scared and laughed with them and all that sorts of stuff. But there was a problem. Dennis never reappeared. Now, to start off, first of all, no one panicked. They just started looking for him. They were calling his name. Maybe he, picked the wrong bush, or maybe he was circling around to sneak up on them or something like that. But after a little while, there was no sign of Dennis, and his father, William, got pretty uneasy, and he began searching the area, calling out Dennis's name, and then running through the trees looking for his son. And all of a sudden, those first few minutes stretched out into hours. And by the time night fell, it was clear that there was something very, very wrong here. So the search began almost immediately. There were rangers, volunteers, and eventually hundreds of people poured into the park. Over the next few days, there was more than 1,400 searchers that combed the Smokies. Now, this was one of the largest coordinated search efforts in the park's history. They brought in bloodhounds, helicopters, and the U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, who just so happened to be training in the area at the time. But here's the chilling part of all this. Despite all of that manpower, Despite all the days of grid searches, Dennis Martin was never found. They didn't find a thing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a body, nothing. They didn't find anything. And it's that absence, the void where evidence should be, that gives rise to the first whispers of something stranger than an ordinary disappearance. You see, most missing person cases eventually turn up something like, a footprint, a piece of, torn clothing, maybe like an abandoned backpack or something, some clue, something that belonged to the missing person. But in the case of Dennis Martin, there wasn't a thing. And for believers, that silence became suspicious. Then the story took another turn. On the same afternoon that Dennis disappeared, there was another family that was hiking in the Rowans Creek area, which was just a few miles away. And they reported hearing what they described as a, quote, terrible, sickening scream. Harold Key, who was the father of that family, told investigators that he saw something or someone moving quickly through the woods, and he described it as a quote-unquote rough-looking, disheveled man who was moving stealthily near the tree line. And at first he thought it might be, just a bear or something, but the more he looked, the more convinced he became that what he was seeing was a man. And that report lit a fire under the imaginations of conspiracy-minded thinkers like myself. So what if Dennis Martin hadn't simply gotten lost? What if he'd been taken? And if he was taken, who was the mysterious figure that Harold Key claimed to have seen? Well, the National Park Service never connected those two dots. They never connected the events. They said the scream and the sighting were totally unrelated. Maybe it was another camper in distress, or maybe an animal making that noise that the Keys misinterpreted. But for those who were already leaning towards the extraordinary, the pieces lined up too neatly to ignore. A child disappears. A scream is heard. A strange, wild-looking man is spotted nearby. And there are no traces of the missing boy. None. Nothing's ever found. So it didn't take long for whispers of wild men in the Smokies to start getting some traction. Old Appalachian folklore about feral humans and mountain men began to mix with the cold facts of the Martin case, and slowly a legend was born. Now, let's pause here and analyze, okay? What really happened to Dennis Martin? The most rational explanations are tragic, but not really mysterious, right? He could have become disoriented and wandered too far, succumbed to exposure. I mean, the Smokies, they're beautiful. Don't get me wrong, I love the Smokies, but they're rugged and there are steep drop-offs all over the place. And because they're so high in elevation, you get sudden weather changes. There's a lot of fast-moving water going through there, and a 6-year-old kid could easily fall off a cliff. He could get in some of that water, that swift-moving water, and drown, or he could just succumb to the elements, and get hypothermia in just a matter of hours. He could have just simply gotten disoriented and wandered off, or got scared because he was waiting there in the woods in an unfamiliar area for too long, and became frightened and tried to find his dad, and went the wrong direction, was disoriented, got lost, and succumbed to the elements. And there's also the possibility that there's an animal around there that got to him. Black bears and wildcats roam all through the Smokies, and if Dennis stumbled upon one, or if one stumbled upon him, or Maybe he could have fallen, hit his head and got knocked out and later became prey. Scavengers could have dispersed his remains quickly, and yet searchers, including trained dogs, didn't find anything. They found nothing. Now that's unusual. It's not impossible, but it's unusual. And then we got to circle back to the Harold Key sighting. Was there really a strange man in the woods on that particular day? If so, could that man have taken Dennis? And if he did, why wasn't Dennis ever seen again? Kidnapping cases usually leave some sort of trails, like someone's trying to use the child's identity, someone's trying to make contact to get ransom money, or there's some shred of evidence that's found. But here, there wasn't anything, just silence. And it's in that silence that legends thrive. The feral human theory says Dennis was taken by a wild man, a person or a group even, living off the land, away from society, preying on hikers and campers when the opportunity would arise. It sounds sensational, but it taps into something deep and primal in us, and that's the fear that the forest itself harbors something watching us, something not quite animal, yet not quite civilized. For many who study feral human lore, Dennis Martin's disappearance is the cornerstone. Without it, the legend might have never gained all the traction that it did. Yeah, the case is tragic, but it also has all the hallmarks of a campfire ghost story. There's a lost child, there's a scream in the woods, a shadowy, weird figure, and an unsolved mystery after more than 50 years. And to this day, people online still debate the details. Some swear the government knows more than it's saying, and other people point to the involvement of the Green Berets as evidence of a cover-up. But why would elite soldiers be called in unless something more sinister was going on, right? In reality, the Green Berets, they were just nearby on a training exercise, and they simply volunteered to help. But the conspiracy theorists, well, we don't always accept the simplest explanation, do we? We don't necessarily follow the Occam's razor type deal. And what's undeniable, though, is this. Dennis Martin's disappearance was real. This wasn't something that was made up. His family's grief was real. And the utter lack of closure left a big hole enough for myth to crawl into it. So as we continue tonight, remember this. The legend of feral humans in the Smokies didn't come out of nowhere. It was born out of a real, heartbreaking mystery. And it all started with a 6-year-old boy, a Father's Day hike, and a shadow in the woods. And with that cliffhanger, it's time for me to try to pay some bills. I'll be back after you listen to this.
Wie wäre es, weniger Zeit mit dem Einkauf zu verbringen und dafür mehr Zeit für deine Lieblingspodcasts zu haben? Mit dem Rewe Abholservice geht das. Bestell deinen Einkauf einfach online und hol ihn bequem und fertig gepackt im Markt ab. Natürlich ohne Mindestbestellwert. So bleibt dir mehr Zeit für die nächste Podcast-Folge oder deine Lieblingstracks. Jetzt ausprobieren auf rewe.de/shop oder in der Rewe-App. Dein Rewe Abholservice. Online bestellen, im Markt abholen.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Now, if you've ever spent time in the Smoky Mountains, you know the air itself feels heavy with history. Man, these mountains are old, older than the Rockies, older than the Alps. They've been here for nearly 300 million years, and for just as long as people have walked these ridges and these valleys, they've been telling stories about what lives in the woods. And to really understand the legends of feral humans and how it took hold, we need to step back from modern conspiracy theories and look at the deeper cultural roots, the folklore of Appalachia, the traditions of the Scots-Irish settlers, and the beliefs of the Cherokee who called these mountains home long before Europeans arrived. Because the truth is, the idea of wild men in the woods isn't something that's new. It's a story as old as the mountains themselves. So let's start with the Cherokee. In their oral traditions, there were stories of spirit beings and shadow figures that lived in the deep forest and the high ridges of the Smokies. Some of these beings were dangerous tricksters or predators that lured travelers away from safety, and others were neutral. They were like guardians of the woods who lived apart from human communities. While they weren't always described as feral humans, these figures reflected a core belief that the wilderness was alive with forces outside human control. When the Scots-Irish settlers came to the Appalachian region in the 17 and 1800s, they brought with them their own traditions. In European folklore, the figure of the wild man was common. It was a shaggy, bearded person living apart from society, sometimes dangerous, sometimes wise. Medieval woodcuts and tales from the old world often depicted these beings as half man, half beast. They weren't quite monsters, but they weren't really civilized men either. Now imagine these settlers moving into an unfamiliar mountain landscape. It's dense, it's dark, it's filled with animal sounds that they don't recognize, and every shadow looks like a threat. So it's no surprise that their wild man stories began to merge with the Cherokee traditions, creating a new kind of folklore unique to the Smokies. And by the 1800s, there were already stories in local newspapers of hermits and outlaws and such living deep in the woods and in the hills and in the mountains. Some of those stories were real. They were men who avoided society, sometimes after committing crimes and sometimes just because they preferred to live a solitary life. And these men were often described as ragged, filthy, long-haired, and dangerous. Farmers would whisper about stolen livestock, and travelers told stories about being ambushed in the back roads on the back country, and little by little the idea of wild men hiding in the hills became part of Appalachian lore. So there's also the cultural role of cautionary tales. Parents in isolated communities would often tell their children not to wander too far from home because the wild man will get you. Now, these weren't necessarily meant as literal warnings that there was a literal wild man out there, but more like a way to keep the kids safe in a dangerous environment where literally a wrong step could mean a fall down a ravine or an encounter with a bear. Fear, wrapped in folklore, became a form of protection. And by the early 20th century, as national parks were established and tourism in the Smokies grew, the wild man stories began to change again. They shifted from local cautionary tales to something that intrigued outsiders. People coming in, city folk, people coming in from the cities, not accustomed to the rural life, found the idea of feral mountain men both frightening and thrilling, I'm sure. Writers, newspaper men, they would exaggerate these stories, play them up, and slowly there's a local tradition that turned into a regional legend. Now, what's fascinating is that these legends aren't unique just to the Smoky Mountains. Across the United States, from the Pacific Northwest to the swamps of Florida, you'll find similar stories of wild men, hairy men, mysterious figures who live outside the bounds of civilization. Probably the most famous example would be Bigfoot, but he's part of a much larger pattern. So it seems that humans have always told stories about, quote unquote, others in the wilderness, beings who look like us but aren't fully us. So now let's connect this back to the feral human narrative. When a child like Dennis Martin disappears without a trace, the human mind naturally searches for an explanation, right? And in the Smokies, where stories of wild men have circulated for centuries, the legend was already there, waiting. The Martin case didn't create the wild man lore. It simply revived it and reshaped it into something for a new generation. It's also important to understand how isolation shapes storytelling. Appalachian communities were historically cut off by geography. Narrow hollers, steep ridges, and long winters made communication with the outside world difficult. And in those conditions, oral storytelling flourished. Folklore became a way to pass down lessons, pass down warnings, and became a form of cultural identity. Legends of feral humans fit perfectly into that pattern. They explained the dangers of wandering too far, and they dramatized the tension between civilization and the wilderness, and they gave a human face, however monstrous it might have been, to the fear of the unknown. So let me share one story that captures this. We have to go back to the 1920s, and there is reports out of Sevier County of a wild man who had been stealing chickens and hogs. Farmers said he'd leave behind strange footprints, barefoot, but yet they were a little bit bigger than normal. I know you're thinking Sasquatch here, okay, but follow me, all right? Children were told not to play near the woods after dark, and for weeks, this story spread, and eventually locals caught sight of the so-called wild man. He wasn't a monster or anything like that. He was a local hermit who had just simply fallen on hard times and been stealing food to survive. But by then, the legend had already taken on a life of its own, and the truth was almost irrelevant compared to the story that people wanted to believe. That's how folklore works. It's not always about fact. It's about meaning. And in Appalachia, the meaning behind feral human stories is tied deeply to the relationship between people and the land. These mountains provide, but they also punish. They shelter, but they also hide. To live here was to accept that the wilderness was never fully under your control. And the figure of the wild man, a half human, half outlaw, embodied that tension perfectly. So now let's fast forward to the 21st century, and the same dynamics are still at play. Only now the oral tradition has moved to online. And instead of people sitting on the front porch telling their stories, we have things like Reddit threads and YouTube videos. And instead of whispered warnings, we have clickbait headlines. The cultural DNA is the same. Fear of the unknown, fascination with the quote-unquote other. But the delivery has changed. And in this new environment, the feral human legend has exploded way past the Smoky Mountains. So when we hear people today talk about wild men or feral tribes in the Great Smoky Mountains, they're not inventing anything new. They're just tapping into the centuries of storytelling. They're echoing Cherokee traditions of spirit beatings, Scots-Irish tales of wild men, and Appalachian stories of hermits and outlaws, and modern conspiracy theories all layered together. And that's why the legend is so powerful. It's not just a single story. It's a tapestry woven from many threads: history, culture, fear, and imagination. The Smokies may or may not hide feral humans, but they absolutely hide generations of stories that make the idea feel almost inevitable. So by now, we've traced the feral human legend back through folklore, Cherokee tradition, and the settler imagination. But here's the thing. Folklore doesn't stay static. It mutates, and in the 20th and 21st centuries, the wild man of the Smokies has undergone his biggest transformation to date, changed from just a whispered mountain story to viral internet legend. And the change all started with a newspaper. In the early 2000s, a few local outlets began revisiting the Dennis Martin case on the anniversaries of his disappearance. These weren't sensational pieces. They were just human interest stories. They were updates on what little was known and reflections from the Martin family, stuff like that. But in the age of the internet, something interesting happened. Those stories were picked up by tabloids and then repackaged with scarier headlines and blasted across the internet. For example, one headline from the Daily Express said, "Are feral cannibals responsible for mysterious disappearances in the Smokies?" And then there was another tabloid that ran with this, "Hidden tribes lurking in the mountains." Now, if you read past the headlines, the articles were they were thin. They just rehashed the details. They had lots of speculation in it and little to no actual evidence of anything. But for casual readers just scrolling online, the headline was the story, right? And it planted a seed. And then came the forums. If you spent any time in the darker corners of the internet, you know places like AR15.com, Reddit's Missing 411, or survivalist forums, and they love a good mystery. In threads that go back over a decade, users share their own stories of something strange in the Smokies, and some people claim to hear screams at night, screams that weren't quite animal, and they weren't quite human either. Other people swore that they saw barefoot tracks deep in the woods or shadowy figures watching them from a distance, stuff like that. It was all over. Now, whether these accounts were real experiences, exaggerations, or just pure, just fairy tales, made up stuff, well, it's almost impossible to tell. But what matters is that these stories spread. One story would spark 5 more. Someone would post a blurry photograph, probably just a hiker with bad posture or something like that, or something that was deliberately faked, for lack of a better word. And, some commenter would go in and go, "Oh, that's proof of a feral tribe." It didn't take long before the Smokies gained a reputation online as one of the hot spots for feral human sightings. And then came YouTube. Channels devoted to strange disappearances, paranormal theories, and cryptid hunting began producing these slick, dramatic videos about feral humans. Grainy forest footage and ominous music and voiceovers filled the videos, and They ask questions like, could the government be hiding the truth about feral cannibals in our national parks? These videos pulled in millions of views, and for a lot of people, that's where the legend of feral humans living in our national parks, i.e. Smoky Mountains, truly got crystallized here. Because here's the thing about the internet age. Repetition equals credibility. When you hear the same story in 5 different places, like a Reddit post, a YouTube video, a TikTok clip, and a headline on Yahoo, your brain starts to treat it as more plausible, even if all 5 sources are just recycling the same rumors and basically saying the same thing. Now, let's look at some of the most common modern claims. One recurring theme is the sound of screaming. Lots of hikers report hearing long, drawn-out wails and screams at night that don't sound like any animal that they recognize. Some of them swear it's a human voice. Others describe it as something in between. So, could these be things like cougars, bobcats, or even foxes? Absolutely. Those animals can make bone-chilling sounds that resemble a human scream. But to someone unfamiliar with the wildlife like that, you can understand how it's easy to imagine a feral human out there, howling off in the dark. Another common thread is footprints. People have posted photos of large barefoot tracks found in, the mud or the snow from deep in the Smokies. And sometimes the prints look human, and sometimes they're distorted or they look incomplete. So, are they real? It's hard to say. Some may be hoaxes. Others misidentified animal tracks, but in the mind of a believer, every footprint's proof that the wild men are out there just beyond the next ridge. Then there are the outright campfire stories that get repeated online as being fact. Hikers stalked at night by figures with glowing eyes. Campers who wake to see a shadowy face peering into their tent. Families chased down trails by silent barefoot pursuers. Some of these are purely fabricated. They're like creepypastas just designed to get clicks. It's just clickbait. But even made-up stories contribute to the legend's momentum. The role of social media can't be overstated here. On TikTok, you got short clips speculating about feral humans that have gone viral again and again. A shaky video of a person running in the distance becomes evidence of a feral cannibal tribe. An unexplained disappearance is immediately linked to the legend. And once these clips get millions of views, they take on a life of their own. This is the folklore cycle in the digital age. In the past, a wild man story might spread across a single county. Today, it spreads across the globe in 24 hours or less. And as it spreads, it mutates. Some versions emphasize the cannibal angle. Feral humans preying on hikers for food. Others lean into the conspiracy theory angle. The government knows about them but hides the truth to protect the tourism industry. And yet others paint feral humans as something more tragic, like they're descendants of outcasts and they've been forced into the wild and forgotten by society. None of these narratives are backed by solid evidence, but they resonate. And that resonance is what keeps the story alive. Let me give you one example from an online discussion. A user posted about camping near Klingman's Dome and hearing what sounded like a group of people chanting deep in the woods late at night. When they called out, the sound stopped abruptly. The next morning, they found bare footprints near their campsite. So was this real? Or was it someone playing a joke? Was it even made up just to get 15 minutes of fame on the internet? Well, we'll probably never know, but the story got shared, reshared, posted, and reposted until it became part of the feral human canon. That's how modern legend works. It doesn't require truth. It requires believability. And the Smoky Mountains, with their deep forests, the long history of disappearances, and eerie beauty, provide the perfect stage. So while the 19th century gave us hermit stories and the 20th century gave us Dennis Martin, the 21st century has given us something new, an always online audience, hungry for the next creepy tale, ready to pass it along at lightning speed. The wild men of the Smokies have gone viral, people. And once a legend reaches that point, it's almost impossible to kill it. Even if tomorrow someone definitively proved that no feral humans exist in the Smokies, the stories would live on. They'd morph, they'd adapt, and they'd find new life in forums, TikToks, and podcasts like this one. Because at the end of the day, people don't just want facts. They want stories that make them feel something. And the feral human legend delivers exactly that: fear, wonder, and the thrill of the unknown. Speaking of unknown, I don't know what's around the corner, but it's some sort of commercial. I'll be right back. Now that we've traced the legend from the disappearance of Dennis Martin through centuries of folklore and the explosion of modern sightings, it's time to step back and ask the hard question. How likely is any of this to be real? Could there really be feral humans living undetected in the Smoky Mountains? Or is there a more rational explanation for the stories and the sightings? So let's start with the most obvious factor: the wilderness itself. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park spans over 500,000 acres, and it's got dense forests, steep ridges, and thick underbrush, not to mention a bunch of running, fast-moving water. And it's easy to see how someone can become lost, disoriented, or injured and never be found. It's got things in it like black bears, bobcats, and other predators that roam these areas. Even without a human antagonist, nature's capable of taking a child, or an adult for that matter, with terrifying efficiency. Exposures, falls, or animal attacks account for a significant number of disappearances every year, not just in the Smokies, but in wildernesses across the country. Next, let's consider the human factor. Hermits, survivalists, or people living off the grid do exist. History and records from the Appalachian region confirm that people have chosen, voluntarily or otherwise, to retreat from society and live in isolation. Some of these individuals may prefer secrecy and avoid contact with park officials or hikers. Now, could they account for sightings of wild men or unusual figures? Possibly, but they could be organized in secret cannibal tribes too. They could maybe prey on visitors for decades. But I would say probably not. The logistics don't work. They would need stuff like food, water, medical care, and the ability to avoid the thousands of annual hikers who go through these trails all throughout the Smokies. It kind of strains the credibility there. Now, another plausible explanation is just simple misidentification. The human mind is wired to see patterns, especially in ambiguous situations. In low light, a bear standing on its hind legs can, under the right circumstances, appear human. A tree stump with moss in the right shape can resemble someone crouching. Even clothes that's discarded in the woods can look like a person at a distance. And combine this with things like fear, imagination, and the prior knowledge of feral human legends, and you've got the perfect recipe for misperception. And we also have to account for folklore and something called rumor amplification. Stories pass through generations of hikers, forum users, or people on social media. It creates a feedback loop. One anecdote sparks another, which sparks another. And by the time the story reaches your feed, your Facebook page, or your campfire, or whatever forum you're following, it's a mixture of fact, fear, and fiction, indistinguishable from many firsthand reports. And let's not forget criminal activity. While it's rare, and I do say it's rare, there have been instances of abduction or assault in national parks, and these crimes could easily be folded into feral human narratives, but they remain exceptional rather than systemic. The idea of a permanent organized cannibal tribe playing on park visitors is far less likely than isolated criminal acts or accidental disappearances. And finally, let's consider psychology. Humans have always been drawn to the extraordinary, right? So legends of feral humans provide us an outlet for our fear, our curiosity, and our storytelling too. They also reinforce a sense of control. If we believe there's a reason someone disappeared, even if it's fantastical, it's easier to process than just, it's just some random tragic accident without any reason or rhyme. So when we look at the sum of all realistic explanations, the evidence points strongly toward ordinary causes amplified by extraordinary imagination. Hermits, misidentified animals, accidents, and rare criminal acts all contribute to this mystery. And you add in centuries of folklore and modern social media amplification, and the feral human legend thrives. And it doesn't need any actual feral tribes living off the grid in the mountains. And yet, as rational as this explanation is, it doesn't diminish the fear, the intrigue, or the human fascination with the unknown. That's why the stories continue to persist generation after generation. While the theory and folklore provide context, the legend of feral humans in the Smokies is always anchored by real-life disappearances. Beyond the Dennis Martin case, other cases have been folded into the narrative. And tonight I'll examine 3 that illuminate why this theory refuses to die. So case 1 is the Trini Gibson case, and it dates back to 1976. So there's a 16-year-old named Trini Gibson who disappeared while on a school trip with his class in Blount County. And according to witness reports, she had wandered off to take pictures of the landscape. And when she didn't return, the group searched extensively. Days passed, and despite the involvement of local law enforcement, park rangers, and volunteers, there was no trace of her. No belongings were found, no clothing, no footprints, nothing that could be conclusively tied to her. Does it sound familiar? Immediately, rumors began to circulate. Some of the locals started whispering that a wild man or a hermit living deep in the mountains had taken poor Trini. Other people said it was, a criminal abduction. And just like Dennis Martin, the absence of evidence created this space for speculation. For decades, the case was cited by believers in feral humans as proof that the mountains hide more than just wildlife. Case number 2 is the Thelma Pauline Melton case, and it dates back to 1981. 58-year-old Pauline, or Polly, as she was known to her friends, Melton, vanished while hiking near Roaring Fork. She was an experienced hiker. She was carrying maps and equipment, and she had planned her route really carefully, but she never returned. Search teams found her car. They found her personal items and signs that she had started the trail, but they never found her. They didn't find a body. Local media reported on her disappearance extensively, and then speculation began to run rampant. Some people suggested she had some sort of accident and fallen down a hidden ravine. Other people said that there was foul play involved, and fringe narratives quickly introduced the possibility of feral humans. In online forums decades later, her case is still discussed alongside Dennis Martin as evidence that there's something lurking in the woods, watching for hikers. Are you sensing a pattern here? People just disappear without a trace, and nothing is found. When I say disappear without a trace, they literally have no trace. There's no clothing, no scraps of clothes, no footprints, no nothing that they can use to say, hey, this person was here and now they're not. They're just gone. So let's look at the third and final case. These are more like modern anecdotal reports here. So even today, hikers will post firsthand accounts of encounters that they can't explain. For example, there's a hiker near Klingsman's Dome that described hearing disembodied chanting and footsteps at night. Another camper claimed to see a barefoot figure retreating into the shadows when they approached. Now, while none of these stories have been independently verified, they maintain the public perception that the Smokies may conceal unknown humans living apart from society. So what ties these cases together? Well, like I said just a minute ago, it's absence. In each case, the missing people left little or no trace. This absence is precisely what fuels the feral human legend. Where there's no evidence, imagination fills in the gaps. And in the Smokies, that gap that needs to be filled has been, it's been filled repeatedly for more than half a century. It's worth emphasizing that these cases are tragedies. The focus should always remain on the missing people, their families, and the search for answers. But because no resolution exists, the legend grows. People naturally ask, if it wasn't a wild man, then what was it? And the question, that question ensures that the story continues. It continues to circulate in forums, online videos, and conversations across generations. With the legends like feral humans, conspiracy theories they're inevitable. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. When we encounter gaps in knowledge, our brains attempt to fill it. And when the stakes feel high, like a missing child, there's a shadow in the woods, a mountain that's steeped in history, the gaps become fertile ground for these elaborate theories. One of the most persistent is the idea that the government and governmental agencies have suppressed the evidence. There are people that claim the National Park Service, the FBI, and or even the military knows more than it's saying about feral humans, that they're covering up incidents to prevent panic or protect tourism. The involvement of the Green Berets during the Dennis Martin search only fuels the speculation. But as I said, in reality, they were simply nearby on training exercises and they volunteered to help. But for conspiracy theorists, such as myself, it's proof of secrecy. Then there are the theories involving organized feral tribes. Some online sources suggest that entire communities have survived undetected for decades, hunting hikers for sustenance. Now, logically, these claims fall apart under scrutiny. Feeding, surviving, and hiding a multi-person group in a park that's frequented by millions each year, I think it'd be virtually impossible. Yet the story persists because it's sensational, it's frightening, and it's memorable. Sociologically, conspiracies like these spread quickly because they appeal to a deep need for understanding. People want to believe that there's a pattern, that something explains the unexplainable. In the absence of concrete evidence, rumors become facts in the mind of the audience. Online forums, Reddit threads, and social media act as accelerants, amplifying stories that may have started as a harmless misperception or simple accident. Believers often cite the conspiracy reports over decades. Children vanish. Hikers hear screams. You see strange footprints. These are proof. And skeptics, well, they'll point to the same pattern and say something like consistency of human error and storytelling. They've got misidentified animals, psychological factors, and folklore that are repeated across generations and regions, and these things create the illusion of a persistent phenomenon. And what's fascinating is how these theories adapt to technology. Before the internet, local newspapers, word of mouth, and small town radio carried these stories slowly. But today, you have a Reddit thread or a viral TikTok video that can spread a claim about feral humans to millions within 24 hours or less. The speed and scale magnify the fear, the intrigue, and the belief. And at the end of the day, conspiracies around the feral humans of the Smokies are a modern layer over centuries of legend. They give meaning to unexplained disappearances, provide excitement for audiences, and allow a sense of control over a world that's inherently unpredictable. Even if none of the conspiracies are true, they reveal something important, and that is how humans cope with uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. It's time to take that final commercial break, and I'll be back with some of my final thoughts after this. As we close tonight's journey into the feral humans of the Smoky Mountains, it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture. At the heart of these legends are real people. Dennis Martin, Trina Gibson, Polly Melton, they all vanished. They left their families and their communities without any type of closure. Their disappearances aren't stories for entertainment. They're tragedies. Yet the void they leave is exactly what allows legend to flourish. Silence, absence, and mystery are powerful storytellers. Legends of feral humans are rooted in centuries of folklore. Cherokee tales of spirits in the woods, Scotch-Irish tales of wild men, Appalachian hermits and outlaws. All of these narratives create a cultural framework that makes the idea of a wild man plausible, even inevitable. The mountains themselves reinforce it. Their rugged terrain, their dense forest, and hidden hollows demand respect as well as caution. They've always been and remain spaces where humans are vulnerable. Modern sightings, viral videos, and online stories continue this tradition in a new form. Social media is accelerating the art of storytelling. A misinterpreted noise, a shadowy figure, or a simple misunderstanding can become evidence of feral humans in a matter of minutes. The legend thrives in this environment, not because it's true, but because it resonates with deep primal fears, fear of the unknown, fear of nature, and fear of what lies beyond the boundaries of civilization. Realistically, large feral tribes hunting humans in the Smokies are virtually impossible. Hermits and isolated individuals may exist. Accidents and animal predation account for a lot of the disappearances, and conspiracies explaining away these events are highly unlikely. But the legend persists because it tells us something important about ourselves. It's a reflection of our fears, our imagination, and our need to make sense of tragedy. And here's the takeaway. Legends matter, but so does responsibility. Storytellers, journalists, and content creators must remember that behind every mystery is a human life, often one that's been lost, sometimes one that's still missing. It's easy to sensationalize, but doing so risks disrespecting the real people and families affected. At the same time, the stories teach us, they excite us, and they bind communities together. We just have to be mindful of the line between myth and reality. So, as you leave these woods tonight, whether in mind or on a trail, remember this. The Smoky Mountains are full of secrets. They don't need feral humans to be mysterious. The Smoky Mountains already are mysterious. But the legends of wild men, the stories of the missing, and the whispers in the dark remind us that the unknown is still alive, and perhaps always will be. The feral humans of the Smokies may be a myth. It may be a misunderstanding, or it may be a manifestation of human imagination. But the truth that the mountains hold danger, beauty, and mystery, well, that's undeniable. This has been Parareality. I'm Sandman. Keep your eyes to the shadows, your mind on the facts, and your respect for the unknown alive. Well, that about does it for tonight. Thanks for listening. But before I close it out, I do have a couple of more things that I want to talk to you guys about. Tomorrow, no, it's not tomorrow. It's it's next weekend that I'm going to be at the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo in Mayfield, Kentucky. That's on Saturday, September 27th, 2025 at the Mayfield Graves County Fairground. That's the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo. Starts at 10 a.m. and goes all the way to 7 p.m. Admission's just $10. That's a small price to pay to have a good time. If you've ever had an encounter with cryptids, UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, or other strange and unusual phenomena, I want to hear your story. I'm going to be there. Come find me and share your experiences. I'll have my table set up with all of my podcasting gear ready to meet you face to face. If you're going to be there and you've had an unusual, mysterious, or just downright creepy experience, something that you can't explain, come find me, share your story, and it just might end up featured on the podcast. This is your chance to connect with fellow truth seekers, swap eerie tales, and dive headfirst into the mysteries that surround us. Don't miss out on a full day of the paranormal. Just head on over to extremeticketing.com, and that's spelled XTREME ticketing, extremeticketing.com, and search for the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo. Or you can visit their Facebook page, the West Kentucky Paranormal Facebook Expo page, for more information. This is going to be a day full of lectures from all kinds of experts in the paranormal community, vendors galore, and of course, I'll be there waiting to collect your story of the downright creepy, the unusual, or the mysterious. So I'll see you in the shadows at the West Kentucky Paranormal Expo, where the weird is welcome. Hey guys, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a story, a question, or a topic you'd like me to cover? Well, you can reach me directly by email at sandman@parareality.com, or for a more personal touch, call the Secret Bunker at 615-492-4364 and leave a message. Just know that by calling, you're giving me permission to feature your voice on the podcast. That number to call once again is 615-492-4364. You want to stay up to date with all things Parareality? You can follow me on all the major social platforms. I'm at sandman.parareality on Facebook, and you can find me on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok by searching for @ParaRealRadio. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Parareality1. That's Parareality with the number 1 behind it. And don't forget to visit my website, parareality.com. It's where you'll find an archive of all past episodes for free, along with the latest paranormal news from all around the world under the Para News section, and that's updated almost daily. Your support means everything, whether you choose to grab some gear from my store or simply leave me a positive review. A 3-star or higher review on your podcast app of choice goes a long way in helping this podcast reach new listeners, and I truly appreciate it. You know, I've got my Patreon page relaunched. I say relaunched, it's been going for the whole year, for as little as $1 a month. You can get commercial-free episodes and other bonus content, and for just a couple of bucks more, you'll have access to my companion podcast, Midnight Syndicate and Beyond Reality. Plus, you also have the opportunity to appear as a guest on the podcast. Subscribing to my Patreon not only helps support the Parareality podcast, but it helps me continue to bring you quality content on a regular basis. To learn more or to join or to even get a 7-day free trial, just go to patreon.com/parareality. Or you can just visit my website, parareality.com, and click on the Patreon link that's at the top of the page. And like I said, you get a free 1-week trial where you can listen to commercial-free podcast episodes. You also get to listen to my companion podcast, or maybe I should say my side projects, Midnight Syndicate podcast and Beyond Reality. So you'll get all that for just a few dollars, and it really does go back into this podcast. I don't make a dime. Every red penny that I get for merch sales or Patreon goes right back into helping me produce quality content for this podcast, because I don't pocket anything. And speaking of my flub earlier, where I said I was the Paranormal Expo is going to be this weekend. It's not. What is this weekend, though, is Anomicon. Now, Anomicon is tomorrow. It kicks off at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 10 a.m. Central. And yours truly is going to be fifth in line speaking. Now, we don't have an exact time, because each lecture is between 30 and like 45 minutes. So I don't know how long the other lectures are before me. So if you just assume that each lecture before me is the minimum of 30 minutes, I'm number 5, so I'm going to be kicking off hour number 3. But regardless, I would really appreciate it tomorrow if you would click on YouTube, Facebook, go to anomicon.com, watch it there at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 Central. I would really appreciate it if you could watch my lecture. It's a great exposure for me and for the podcast, and I can't wait for you guys to hear my lecture on the ethics of conspiracy theories. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, and it would mean a lot to me if you guys would listen to that. And it also helps Anomicon as well. And I want to thank Ryan Sprague from Somewhere in the Skies. He is the guy that puts on Anomicon, and I really appreciate him giving me this opportunity. Well, I've rambled enough. I hope that you've enjoyed tonight's episode of Parareality. Our next episode is not going to drop until Friday, October the 3rd, so I got a little bit of time off. It's going to drop at 8 p.m. Central U.S. time. Yeah, 8 o'clock Central U.S. time. Wow. And it's going to kick off spooky season. I don't know what my topic is going to be, but it's going to be something spooky Halloween related. So you'll just have to tune in, and find out on Friday, October the 3rd, 2025, 8 o'clock p.m. Central U.S. time. Everyone, I hope this podcast opens up your mind to new ways of thinking, expands your consciousness, and produces a change in the way you see the world. If you wish to change, you must lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe. Hope you have a great evening, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks. Good night, everybody.
If you wish to change, you must first lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe.
Hey, it's not over. Thanks for sticking around. I got something to tell you. Do you want to be a member of the Secret Sanctum? Well, if you do, there's only one way to do that. Somewhere on parareality.com is a link hidden in my website. And if you can find that link and click on it, you'll be granted access to the secret bunker, and you'll become a member of the Secret Sanctum. It's 100% free. It's not going to cost you anything. And once you become a member, you'll have access to some secret audio files and secret documents, some of which are exclusive only to Parareality and the members of the Secret Sanctum. You'll also get a free Parareality
Secret Sanctum t-shirt. Just fill out the form and let me know what size you are, where you're located in your name, and I'll get that right out to you. So if you want to be a member of the Parareality Secret Sanctum and have access to the secret bunker, find the link